Boom. For you guys on YouTube, yes, I'm wearing the same t-shirt because we're doing this right after the Terran one. Don't get me started on your jokes and memes. So, let's talk about Zerg changes. This is going to be spicy. So let's talk about Zerg changes. Once again, I want to say, in case you didn't watch the Terran video and you didn't hear about me discussing Terran changes, I don't think that all of these changes should go through, but I will give a reasoning for each change that I'm about to mention and why they should be changed and why I think that would lead to a better StarCraft II game. Now, the Zerg changes and the Terran changes, mix of them, some of them going together, I think would be good for the game, but I have no idea if that is 100% true. Just want to get it out there. Here we go. So Zerg is, as probably everyone knows, unless you've been sleeping under, I don't know what you could be sleeping to not know that Zerg is winning everything for the past 2.5 years. I think it's no secret that Zerg is the strongest race for the past 2.5 years, and that Terrans are lazy and they don't practice. But on the other hand, Zergs do. Let's get started. Zerg changes. Queens. To start things off, we're gonna hit them right in the nuts. One unit that every Protoss and every Terran player hate because of how strong it is the Queen. The first thing I would do is nerf the Queen anti-air range by 1. I think this is probably one of the worst changes that Blizzard has done in StarCraft II. Not necessarily because it buffed the Queen and now it can, I don't know, do what, but because it removed so many units and so many unit harassments from the game that it's actually sad. Do you guys remember back in the day in early Legacy, in Heart of the Swarm, in Wings of Liberty, where people went for Cloak Banshee harassment? Trying to pick off the drones working at the extractors, just opening Cloak Banshee, Banshees running around. Then opening Liberators against Zerg, harassing. Do you know why nobody does that anymore? It's because Queen anti-air range is so insane that you cannot hit a drone without a Queen hitting your Banshee. It went from good Zerg players were able to position their Queens at the proper locations to your Queen doesn't even need to be properly positioned to just defend whatever is up against it. So I do think that Blizzard buffing the Queen range was probably one of the worst decisions because it removed so many openers from both Protoss and Terran against the Zerg, and it is one of the main reasons why, like I discussed in my previous balance versus game design video, Queen buff removed so many options for the Terrans to go for harassment and for Protoss, that now we only have like battlecruiser openers versus Zerg because the Queen range doesn't matter. That's the only reason, and that's why you don't see Cloak Banshees. That's why you don't see Liberators. So this is the first thing I would do. Second thing, Queen Injects would be changed. So for those who don't know the exact numbers, Queens currently give 3 extra larvae when you do the inject onto the hatchery. So the change that I would make is that you only get 2 extra larvae if you're stacking injects. So what does this mean? If a hatchery just finished and you inject it, you would get 3 extra larvae at the end of that inject. But if you go to a hatchery and it already has inject going and you inject again, you would get only 2 larvae from the next one. So why am I making this change? The larva stacking or injecting, whatever you want to call it, promotes for bad gameplay. Why would you inject straight away when you can just make extra queens and just stack injects? You know, there's no reason for you to pay attention to injects anymore. You can inject for the first couple of minutes and then just make extra queens and you just spam inject onto it and that's it. And I think back in Wings and Heart of the Swarm, for those people that have watched StarCraft II, there was a huge difference between a top Zerg level player and a low GM as far as unit production goes. And I don't mean to bash Zerg players these days. I'm not saying they're not good, but that gap in how many units you can produce is just so small right now. Imagine if every Terran had the unit production capability as innovation all of a sudden, because that's what's happening with Zerg macro mechanics, the larva inject, which is the most important, due to stacking. So I think that if you stack your injects, if you're not good at injecting on time, you should get one larva less. And this will allow it for the best players like Cyril, Raynor, to be like, he has so many units on the field, and that's because his macro is perfect. Not because he was holding down the Z button for lings or the R button for roaches, but because he was injecting properly. This would not affect low levels. If you lose a game at a, Masters and under because of this, I will personally delete Terran and Protoss so you can play ZVZs all day. But I 100% guarantee that will never happen. So you can still stack injects, you just get one larva less. And the last thing is late game Zerg Remax is extremely strong. I talked about this with the Terran changes. So right now you can stack 19 larvae per hatchery. That is 19 units you can produce instantaneously. I would nerf that from 19 to 15 per hatchery. What would this do? Well, it would make no difference in the early to mid game. It would just nerf the Zerg late game and the ability for them to make 200 lings, out of however many bases, 6, 7 bases, because I think that's a bit ridiculous. Next thing, Vipers. Something I never understood about Vipers in StarCraft II is why can they yoink Mothership? Why can Vipers yoink massive units? To me, that never made any sense. And to me, that completely nullifies and removes specifically PvZ, Carriers, and Tempest from the game. This is why Protoss players don't want to go late game against Zerg. Even now that we don't have Infested Terrans, Zergs have removed that with more Vipers, more yoinks, and killing a carrier that takes so long to build because you just pulled it, and it has no counterplay. Yes, you can feedback, but there's also lurkers on the ground, there's infestors. Even though it sounds good on paper, it doesn't really work in games. So what I would change as far as Vipers, Viper Yoink no longer works on massive units at all. So this would mean that Thors, Battlecruisers, Tempest Carriers, Mothership, and Broodlords are now unyoinkable. You cannot pull them with Vipers anymore. To accompany this, because it is a nerf, Vipers would get +1 yoink range and +1 blinding cloud range as well. So I think that Viper as a unit should not be a unit that just pulls the most expensive units and just one-shots them with your Hydras or Corruptors. Originally, this was planned to be a unit that can break up siege lines and that could help Zerg engaging siege tanks, help engaging lurkers, help engaging Colossus, and at this point it removes them from the game completely, and it makes the other two races not want to go for those units at all in the first place. As a Protoss, why would you go? I mean, that's why the -400 meme exists, because why would you go for a Mothership when the moment the Zerg sees it, they just pull it and kill it? I think that if you think about it, the most powerful, biggest unit in the Protoss army just gets pulled and killed straight away. To me, that's just stupid. And, having carrier army and then all of them getting pulled in exchange for energy and killed is just, yeah. So by giving it +1 range and +1 blinding clouds, it would not make it, equal level as nerfing the Viper pull on the massive units, but it would help them a bit with using blinding clouds on siege tanks, on Thors, and kind of breaking those siege positions a little bit easier, since it did get a nerf on the massive units. Next thing, and this is a big one. This is something I thought about quite a bit, if it is worth, if it is not worth. And by the way, I just want to say another thing. I mainly play Terran and Protoss. I am biased towards Terran and Protoss. And I do think that Zerg needs nerfs. And I think that right now, if you've been watching StarCraft, you probably think so as well. So you will see the most nerfs / changes in a negative way for the Zerg. But not in a way where their units like Hydras and Lings now don't do damage and you can win battles. Just want to mention that and clear that up. So this next change, I don't know when exactly this happened, and I don't know why exactly this happened, but having maps in one-on-one professional ladder pool and just tournament pool, where each map has a safe spot for the Overlord above the natural, makes no sense. That shit needs to go straight away. That is... why? I just don't... This is one of those changes like the Viper Yoink. Why? Why does the Zerg get the free scouting that is like, you cannot deny it? There's no way to do anything about it. They just see whatever you're doing, right? If you're playing against Zerg and you're Terran Protoss, they see you moving the Adepts out. They see you moving the Hellions out. They see you moving the Buyout. Why? Why does Zerg get that and not the other two races? To me, that never made sense. And I feel like with the recent map polls, it's getting worse, where it's like they're placing the pillars in a spot that not only they can see your natural exit, they can also see your main ramp. So they can literally see what's going down the ramp. And to me, that's a big no. I'm sorry, but no. What I would do is, I do think that having that spot above above certain things should still exist, but it should be closer to where the third base is for the Terran and Protoss, and not above the natural. It just should just not happen. Or at least, maybe you can put it there, but there's a way for Protosses and Terrans to kill it without making an air unit. Now, some people might say, well, you can just make a Viking or a Phoenix or an Oracle. You can, but then you've already revealed what you're doing to the Zerg. So it doesn't change the fact that that Overlord gave them the exact information that they need to fight against whatever you're having. To accompany this change, I'm not sure how to exactly go about this. Initially, I thought changing the Overlord speed from 100-100 to 75-75. I thought about putting it at 50-50 as well, but I think reducing the cost for the Overlord speed can help a bit, and I have no issues if Zerg upgrades Overlord speed and then scouts. They invested into scouting, just like Terran makes a Reaper, just like Protoss uses 100 gas to make a Sentry and then Hallucination. That's also an investment. But the fact that the Zerg is not investing anything and they get free scouting, to me, is a big no-no. So I would make the Overlord speed upgrade cheaper. Because, yeah. Next thing. One of the big problems that I also personally have, as much as Terrans and Protosses have, is how much map vision Zerg has. I think this is one of these strengths that not many people talk about. Because I think the way people see it is, well, it doesn't deal damage, so it's fine, right? Like, it doesn't do damage, it doesn't kill your unit, so it's fine. But if you think about it, one of the main issues why at a pro level, and again, I'm talking about pro level, why it's hard to harass Zergs is because they see the whole map. The edges of the map are covered by Overlords, and everything in between is creep and creep spread. And yes, you can kill, again, this is the same point, you can kill creep, but by the time you kill creep, they see your army and they see where your army is. And I think that's a problem, not so much at the low level, but at the high level. So a change I would make to this is inactive not active ones. Active creep tumors are the ones that you use to spread creep. Inactive creep tumors, the ones that you can't do anything with anymore, would have 50% less vision. Would this absolutely remove Zerg scouting and not being able to see the armies around the map? Absolutely not. But I do think that Zerg vision is insane right now. They have so much free scouting and so much vision around the map. If you look at any pro games, look at Zerg point of view and you will know exactly what I mean. At first I thought it would be good to remove the vision from inactive creep tumors completely, but I think that may be too much, so I would start with 50% less vision and go from there. Now, I know that there's some Zerg and, you know, silver, and it's like, well, how am I supposed to see armies now? Well, you have a unit that costs half a supply called Zergling, and you can literally put it anywhere on the map. Terrans and Protosses don't have that. Next thing. Now now this was the bad for the Zerg, okay? Now we're gonna talk about changes that are positive / change the way that some of the Zerg units work. So these are the ones I'm actually excited for. These above were kind of what I said. I don't want to get into like +1, -1 things, but I do think queens need a nerf. So yeah. Next change is a very small one. Broodlord movement speed increased from 2 to 2.1. So I do think that Broodlords right now are not too hot in the game. I thought a lot about how it would help Broodlords a tiny bit, but every conclusion I've gotten to would make Broodlords go back to Broodlord Infestor era. And for now, I do think that the one problem that Broodlords have is attacking. And if you fail the attack, they're pretty much always dead. Like, you kind of forfeit with them. So, for start, I thought about increasing Broodlord movement speed to 2.2, but it's just a small little help so that Zergs can move with Broodlords more freely. 2.1. Not a big change. Not a big change. But again, every other change that I wanted to do to Broodlords felt like it would be too much, and it would bring up the Death Army again. Now, this is the one that the exciting ones are coming now. Ultralisk. So Ultralisk, in my opinion, is probably one of the most exciting units that don't have explosive moments or abilities. So what do I mean by that? Well, Disruptor is a spellcaster that has a explosive ability, literally, and it's a very hype moment when Disruptors hit. Ultra is an auto attack unit, but I feel like they're just, when you see them on the battlefield, when they're moving, you're like, oh shit, Ultras are coming, kind of thing. And they're cool to see, but we never see them. And the main issue with why we never see them, we see them against Terrans sometimes, but versus Protoss and versus Zerg, 99.9% of the games, we never see Ultralisks. And I thought about how would I go about fixing this? How would I go about helping Ultras be used more without breaking the game and making them unkillable? So what I would do is next. I would remove the movement speed upgrade completely from the game. So we've recently had that upgrade that gives them extra movement speed. I would remove that. I would, keep them as they were before the upgrade. And I would also remove the Ultralisk armor tag. The reason why Ultra is not used in PvZ and ZvZ is because of Lurkers and because of Immortals. They absolutely giga crap on them. And I personally would love to see a Zerg that loves playing with Linkbane Muta versus a Zerg that loves playing Roach Infestor Hydra, and then the Muta guy can actually go into Ultras without forfeiting the game because the Lurkers will obliterate them. I would also love to see a PvZ that is not focused on Hydras, but that can actually go into late game and Protoss can go Ultras without literally auto-losing the game. Immortals and Lurkers are hard counters to Ultras. So I would remove the armor tag, remove the movement speed upgrade for them. I would reduce the armor by 1 on the Ultras and increase the health by 100. So what does this mean? This is a lot of like things happening to it. Basically, by removing the armor tag would make the ultras extremely hard to kill. Marines already, you know, they don't kill it too fast. So now Terran not having Marauders or not having Liberators or not having, you know, Immortals, Lurkers, it would be extremely hard to kill. So my proposed change to this would be reducing the armor by 1. This would allow other units that currently deal bad with ultras, including stuff like Zerglings. Obviously, you wouldn't make Zerglings against ultras, but like Marines, like units that shoot fast, Zealots, would be able to deal with ultras better and not have those background units like Thor's tanks, units that deal bonus to armored, would not hard counter them. They would still be good against them, but they would not hard counter them. And I would also increase the HP by 100 because to accompany for that -1 armor. I don't know, this is something that would need to be tested. I don't know if this would make the Ultra too good. I don't know how it would exactly work when there's 10 Ultras in the field and how hard they would be to kill. But this is something that would open up, not perhaps, it would 100% open up to Ultras being used more in PvZ and in ZDZ. I think one of the coolest interactions you can have in StarCraft II, and I know this is going to sound crazy coming from me because you guys know I don't really like ZDZ, but I think it would be such a cool interaction to see a Roach Ravager Hydra player versus a Link Bane Ultra player. That's a mirror matchup, but the matchup is different, right? You're not playing a ZDZ, you're playing, let's call it a melee Zerg versus a ranged Zerg. And it would allow for so many new interactions, and it would perhaps change the way that the matchup is played without nerfing roaches, without messing up TVZ, because by reducing the armor by 1, the Marines can help, and you wouldn't need Marauders only to deal with it. And there would be less counters, less hard counters, but more counterplay options. And I think this is something that can make Ultras usable, because I think they're cool units. Next thing. Infestor Microbial Shroud. When this ability was announced, I was very happy that they removed Infested Terrans, but I did say in the video where I reviewed patch changes that Microbial Shroud is a crap ability and it needs to be buffed. Because it's a bad ability. I've said it. And, you know, guess what? How many times have you seen it? I don't even know how it looks like. I'm pretty sure if someone uses it, I'll be like, is this glitch? Is my game glitching? Is my monitor working? Nobody knows. So my suggested change to this, instead of doing whatever it's doing now, it would reduce damage coming from a range area of effect attacks and spells by 50%. So this is kind of like Dark Swarm, but not really. But kind of. Pretty much. So, why do I want this change? In Brood War, Dark Swarm ability was negating ranged attacks. That's what it was doing. It was reducing them to minimum amount, and then if you dealt splash, you could still do damage in it. This ability, let's say Cutie Shroud, would reduce the area of effect damage from spells and attacks within the cloud. So not ranged attacks. So for example, if you would use it on Lurkers, Marines would still deal full damage to it. Marauders will still deal full damage to it. But units like Siege Tanks, if a Siege Tank shoots, the main attack would deal full damage. The splash would not. It would be all reduced by 50%. So why this change to the Microbial Shroud? Zerg is a race that struggles with the same things as Terran in the late game. So I talked about it earlier, that I would buff Terran Medevac so that it heals 2 units at the same time. this is the Zerg version of what I do to help the Zerg. So for example, whether you're attacking with melee, whether you're attacking with Hydras, the biggest counter to both of those is Storm, and we know how good Storm is against Zerg. So by having this, you could have a counterplay where you use a Shroud and the units inside would receive, instead of 80 damage for full duration, they would receive 40 damage. So I listed all the things that I could think of, and I might have missed some. So the range of it, how big it would be 3.5 radius. So for comparison, Sentry Guardian Shield is 4 and Storm is 1.5 radius. So this would be reduced damage done by siege tanks, only the splash. Widow Mines, because it is a splash attack, but not to the main target. Seeker Missiles, the new ones that I've proposed. Reduces Hellion attacks, but not Hellbat attacks. Hellbat attacks would count as melee, just like Banelings would, and they would deal full damage, even though they're splash. Storm, Disruptors, Colossus, Fungal Growth, Parasitic Bomb, Lurker attack, and that's it. So this would allow for the Zerg player in the late game to have an ability to help defend against AoE spells specifically, because I do think that is one big issue for the Zerg. In certain armies, depending what you have, it's extremely hard to split your units or to negate that storm damage, and I think this would allow for the Zerg to be more of a swarm instead of just what it is right now. Next thing, and this is the one I probably thought about a lot, aka the most, sorry, brain fart. Swarm hosts. I think swarm hosts are bad gameplay, and not because they're free. I'll say why. Swarm hosts are extremely dependent on how the first locust swarm goes. For example, if you pop swarm hosts at a Protoss third and you kill it, that is game over at a high level. That is actually game over. Protoss cannot come back from that at a high level because there's no investment from the Zerg. And, you know, with each next cooldown, they're going to keep sniping free stuff, right? So, on the other side, if the Zerg makes 10 swarm hosts and uses the locust and nothing happens, Zerg can literally die. Like, the Protoss can move across the map and kill you. That's how important the first locust wave is at a high level. So I thought a lot about how would I change this, because I don't like the interaction of, oh, you didn't see them? Well, I guess your whole base is dead and there's nothing you can do about it because their DPS is insane. So these are my proposed changes. I would add a evolution ability to the swarm host. So what would this do? Swarm hosts would have two different forms. I don't know what you want to call them. I haven't really thought about names. To transition from one to another, it would take 30 seconds and it would have 1 minute cooldown. So you wouldn't be able to swap back and forth, right? And they would also be having visual graphics. So you would see if it's the first one or the second one if you're playing against Swarm Host, and you would know what to expect. So this would either be free transformation or it would cost, let's say, 25 per Swarm Host. I don't know about that. So what would the two different forms be? I don't like like I said, I don't like the way locusts are used right now. And there was also a point in time where swarm hosts in Heart of the Swarm were different, and they were used in different ways. So I got kind of inspiration for this from both of those. So what I would do is next. The first form that would come out from the hatchery would be the ground ranged locusts. So what does this mean? When they come out of the hatchery, you can either switch them to the other evolution straight away, kind of like Thor mode, but it would take 30 seconds, so you wouldn't be able to back and forth. So they would be ground locusts. They would not be able to fly, and they would deal ranged damage. I don't know the exact numbers on locusts right now, But let's say if they're having 3 range, I would give them 5 range, and the health would remain the same, and I would make them light units. They would get their DPS nerfed by 50%, but the duration would be increased. So if they're lasting, I think, 19 seconds, they would last 30 seconds. The reason for this is I think that locusts have insane DPS, and most of the, like, whenever you watch games, they never get killed. If you guys notice, people always run away from them. And the reason for that is there's no point fighting them. They expire so fast. So what I would do is trade the damage for the duration, so they actually feel more zergy and you can actually use them longer. I would remove, like I said, nerf the DPS on them. And this is something that you would use with your main army. So for example, you could use Ling Ultra based army or Ling Baneling based army with Swarm Host that would basically produce ranged units for you. And you could also use them with roaches. Instead of using Roach Hydra, you can kind of take the same play or gameplay by taking roaches and swarm hosts and having 3 locusts support them. And this would change the way you're playing with them. Suddenly, the locust would be a ranged unit used in your main army to support your melee units or even tank, or just be a ranged support for X amount of time. Now, the second form would be the flying locusts. The flying locusts, on the other hand, would be armored units. They would have more health, so they would go from 50 health to, let's say, 70 health, but they would be melee units, and they would count as armored. So same thing with them. The damage that locusts have now would be nerfed by 50%. The duration would be increased to 30. So these locusts are something that you would use to try and kill workers, harass bases, but also to engage the siege applications. So if there's siege tanks, these are the locusts you want to use because they can fly on top of the siege tanks, they're melee, yada yada. Same thing if you're fighting against lurkers or whatever else. If you're fighting Colossus, you want to use those over the ones that are on ground and they're light, because Colossus will melt them. So why light and armored? Because this creates for a lot of counterplay. If I'm Protoss and I see they're in whatever melee form for the Locust, I know that the attack will be frontal. And the game becomes less RNG of, oh, where's the Nidus Swarm going to pop next? And, you know, if I don't see it in time, my base is dead. You can actually see when the Zerg player is switching to flying locusts, and you can prepare accordingly. Not only that, sniping bases wouldn't be as big of a deal as it is right now, because you could build buildings around the Nexus and reducing the surface area for the locusts, which would help with these kinds of situations where, you know, the Zerg just pops in your Nexus, boop, 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 it's dead, and you're kind of done. So by having light and armored, you would have different counters to specific situations, and you couldn't just make mass Colossus. You would perhaps need Immortals to deal with it, yada yada. Now, this is probably like the most complex change that I thought of, but I think it provides something that StarCraft lacks right now, which are options. When Zerg players make Swarm Hosts now, they go for the bases, because what else are you going to use them for? But having Swarm Host that has 2 different evolutions provides you for 2 different gameplay styles, whether you're going to go for bases, whether you're going to go for an army. And not only that, and obviously the numbers can always be tweaked. These are not like final numbers and this is it. The numbers can always be tweaked. That's not an issue. It's more about gameplay and how you're using them. So by having the locusts or the swarm host in certain mode, the opponent can counterplay, the opponent can see what you want to do with them, and the overall interaction will seem a lot less random and more of reactionary and units interacting with each other, rather than you being like, oh, there's locust, there's my Nexus, or you trying to chase swarm hosts around the map with like a prism or medevac drop trying to snipe them, because I think it's just stupid gameplay. I think there's like Nidus is popping everywhere, Swarmos popping out, using and running away into another Nidus. I don't think that's interactive gameplay. I think that that's not fun for both players, because one player doesn't have a say in randomness sometimes. And we've seen this where Protoss player defends 3 locations, and then Nidus pops in the 4th location, they use Locust, and Protoss loses the base. So, yeah. Now, these are all the Zerg things that I would personally change. First changes I've done and I thought about were Terran ones, and then I did the Zerg, and then I did the Protoss. And I wouldn't want to, do insane amount of changes to every race. But like I said already, and I'll mention it again, I wouldn't implement all these changes at once. Some of them can be implemented, straight away together, but some of them are maybe like double nerfs and some things that perhaps wouldn't need to. But stuff like, changing Ultralisk or Microbial Shroud or even Swarm Hosts, I don't think it would break the game in any way. Obviously, people would test it, but also stuff like Queens having -1 range, kind of need it. But like I said, the Zerg part had more nerfs than a Terran, and that's simply because the Zerg currently needs more nerfs than and changes in the other 2 races. Now, I would love to know what you guys think about these. I don't think these will fix the game, but these are just my thoughts on how the game can be better, more interesting to play, and that's it. After Zerg ones, we're going to check the Protoss ones, so let's jump into it. For you guys on YouTube, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.